So this is section 1.5 in Honors Algebra 1 on integer operations, and actually all that we've been doing so far has been a review. This, gosh, I don't even know when you first do positive and negative numbers, maybe, I don't know, maybe 5th grade, I don't know, 6th grade. So when we add and subtract integers, first of all, let's think about addition, all right? If you add two positive numbers, this just means positive. So a positive plus a positive always equals a positive. Okay? If you add two negatives, it's always going to equal a negative. And if you add a positive and a negative, it depends. It's always going to be the sign of the larger number. So for example, if I add a positive 2 and a positive 5, I know it's going to be positive 7. Now, if I have two negatives, negative 2 and negative 5, I know my answer is negative. And something that's kind of helpful is if the signs are the same, notice both positive or both negative, then you always end up adding the numbers. Even if they're negatives, you actually end up adding the numbers. 2 and 5 is 7. It's just that the answer is negative 7, right? Okay, however, whenever you have a positive and a negative, one of each, you're actually going to end up subtracting the numbers and then take the sign of the larger. So in this case, if I have 2 plus negative 5, and it doesn't matter if we write it as the negative 5 by itself or in a parenthesis, it says the same thing, 2 plus negative 5. So I know I'm going to subtract. 5 minus 2 is 3. And then I'm going to take the sign of the larger number. Well, 5 is more than 2, so my answer is negative. Okay? Now, subtraction should always be changed to addition. I know you know this, but I'm going to change it a little bit different based on how you've seen it. The way you would have been taught to do this would be to say, well, if it's 5 minus 8, we're going to think of it as 5 plus negative 8. And that's correct. That's how we're going to think of it. But what I'm going to tell you is you don't have to rewrite it. If you look at this, if you just look at the problem, I see a positive 5 and a negative 8. And so I know how to do that. I know I have different signs, so I subtract, and then I take the sign of the larger. Okay, I'm going to cross over here to number 2. Just like we talked about before, instead of rewriting it, I see a negative 5 and a negative 8. Since they're the same sign, I know I'm going to add them and get 13. And then because they're both negative, I know the answer is negative. Down here on number 3, you've been taught, and this is the best thing to do on these, whenever you see minus and negative right in a row like that, they cancel each other out, and it just becomes a big giant positive. So even if it's in parentheses, it doesn't matter. If they're right next to each other like this, it becomes a big giant positive. So 5 plus 8 is 13. Okay, same thing here. I see the two negatives in a row, so that becomes a plus. Same thing down here. It doesn't matter if the parenthesis is there or not. So when I look at this, I see a negative 5, a positive 8, which means different signs. So I subtract and then take the sign of the larger. So in this case, positive 3. Okay. Number 5, doesn't matter if it's fractions. If I have a positive and a negative, right? The first one's positive, second one's negative. Then I take the sign of the larger. So just thinking out loud, kind of critical thinking, which is larger, 4/5 or 9/10? Well, to me, 9/10 is closer to a whole than 4/5. So I can tell 9/10 is more, and my answer is going to be negative. But I still have to get a common denominator, right? Because they're fractions. Well, let's see. I think my common denominator is going to be 10. So that means I'm going to multiply both the top and the bottom by 2. So I actually have 8 minus 9 for my numerator. So I'm going to end up, whoops, I didn't mean to put a negative. I added an extra negative, sorry about that. 8 minus 9, right? So I'm going to end up with final answer of negative 1/10. Okay? Let's go over here and do some practice. It might be helpful if maybe you let's kind of do half of them at a time. Maybe we'll do 1 through 9. It might be helpful if you just try 1 through 9 yourself, pause the video and then turn it back on and see if you got them right. Just see if you can do them by yourself. Well, how'd you do? Did you get them right? A couple things maybe I would point out, I don't know, just in case there were mistakes. One thing I notice is down here on number 9, remember that's going to become a plus, and then you have different signs, and that's why you're subtracting. Sign of the larger would be positive. One common mistake, look at number 7 over here. When I look at this, I see a -3 and a -4. So both negative, so I know my answer is negative. And because they're the same, I know I'm going to add the numbers and get 7. Okay, so maybe you try 10 through 18, same concept. You might want to pause the video, try those, and then compare to see how you did. Okay, so why don't you compare your answers, see if we agree on all of them, because to tell you the truth, if we do, then that means you've gotten one wrong, because I intentionally got one wrong, and I wonder if you can pick it out. Maybe take a second, see if you can pick out the one that I intentionally got wrong. Well, the one I intentionally got wrong is actually number 16. It's actually number 16. Because kind of like number 7 up above, remember how I said that's a pretty common mistake? When I look at this, I see 2 negative numbers. Those are both negative, which means I add the numbers together and I get 9. So yes, my answer is negative, but it's going to be -9. Okay, let's go back and talk about multiplication and division. Usually these are kind of easier for people than addition and subtraction, so we'll just do a quick refresher on these. Whenever you multiply two numbers, whenever you multiply two positives, it always equals a positive. When you multiply two negatives, it always equals a positive. You probably heard the phrase, two negatives make a positive. And then if you multiply one of each, positive and negative, it doesn't matter which one's smaller and which one's larger. It always equals a negative. So for example, up here, multiplying 2 and 5, they're both positive, so my answer is positive. Multiplying -2 and -5, they're both negative, so my answer is positive. But one of each, so my answer is negative. And it wouldn't have mattered if it had been the 2 that was negative. If I had -2 times +5, it still would have equaled -10. Okay, and division has the exact same rules. So when I look at number 1, I'm multiplying two fractions, negative times negative, so I automatically know my answer is positive. Now I know we don't normally write a positive next to a positive number, but I'm just doing that to remind me. And so now I can just multiply on top, 2 times 3 is 6. On the bottom, 5 times 4 is 20. And I can't leave it like this. I need to simplify it to be 3/10. Okay. On number 2, a negative divided by a positive is a negative. Doesn't matter which one's smaller, which one's larger. And so now in order to think of this as 2 over 1. So for division, don't I have to do keep, change, flip? So change it to multiplication and flip the second fraction. So it's actually going to be a 4, right? -4. Okay, in this case, I have 3 negatives being multiplied. So the way I'm going to look at it is when I multiply 2 negatives, it equals a positive. And now I have a positive times a negative, so it's going to be a negative. And then I can just multiply my numbers. 2 times 3 is 6. 30 times 5 is 150. Okay, we got some order of operations. So the first thing I'm going to do is this multiplication. Right, -4 times 3. So I've got -20 plus -12. And the bottom, 1 minus 5, think of that as +1, -5, so that's -4. So I've got a total of 2 negatives on top, so -32 over -4. So if you divide 2 negatives, I know it's a positive. 32 over 4 is 8. Okay, so maybe just a little bit more practice. Maybe you try all of 19 through 25 and see how you do, and then pause the video and compare answers.